evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. The White House held what they described as a listening session today, where survivors of last week's Florida shooting gathered with the parents of children killed in previous shootings to discuss what the country ought to be doing going forward. Here's some of what was said.
We must create a culture of connectedness. We must create a culture in which our classmates become our friends. Every single one of these school shootings have been from young men who are disconnected.
One school shooting, and we should have fixed it. And I'm pissed, because my daughter I'm not going to see again.
I want to feel safe at school. You know, senior year and junior year, they were big years for me when I turned my academics around, started connecting with teachers, and I started actually enjoying school. And now, I don't know how I'm ever going to step foot on that place again.
A teacher would have a concealed gun on them. They'd go for special training, and they would be there, and you would no longer have a gun-free zone. Gun-free zone to a maniac, because they're all cowards. A gun-free zone is let's go in and let's attack, because bullets aren't coming back at us.
You feel for those kids and their families. It seems likely as a political matter that some form of gun control may be coming. The White House has signaled support for stricter background checks and a federal ban on bump stocks. But that's not even close to what many on the left are demanding. You saw some of those demands today at widely televised gun control rallies in Florida. Some of those in attendance were kids from Stoneham Douglas High School in Parkland, and that should not be surprising. It's understandable. People become political activists all the time in response to tragedies. That's their right. Nobody ought to attack them for it. We're certainly not attacking them. We never would. We assume they have the best motives. Most of us have the best motives. Almost everybody's against school shootings. The question is, what do you do about them? Now, if you watch a lot of cable news, you know that the answer is simple. You simply stop taking money from the NRA and you do something about guns. Not anything specific, just something. But first, you have to defeat the evil conservatives who love school massacres. Once you do that, the violence will go away like magic. And so the demagogues on the other channels are telling you. They use the traumatized children of Parkland as a human shield. Ask them what they're calling for. Ask them to describe these policies that will supposedly fix everything. And these childless news anchors screech that you're attacking the children. It's funny, every January, thousands of other children come to Washington for the March on Life. Like the kids from Parkland, they're against killing. Some of them have had abortions. A few of them have survived abortions. Do the media hold these kids up as the last word on the subject? Do they attack anyone who questions them? Please. A lot of news outlets don't even bother to cover that march at all. All kids at any march, just like all Americans, have a right to talk and to do so in public, to give their opinions anywhere, including on television. Unlike many on the left, we support that right unequivocally in every case. But the rest of us also have a right to add our voices to the conversation. We have an obligation to do that because we all have a stake in this country's laws. And the truth is, this is a remarkably complicated subject. That's why we haven't fixed it yet. Any answer has to balance our need for safety with the respect for the civil rights of individuals and an acknowledgement that this is a constitutional republic. It's not the set of Morning Joe. For example, pretty much everybody agrees that people with mental illness should not have firearms. That sounds simple, okay. But what do you do then with the more than 400,000 Iraq and Afghanistan vets who have received a diagnosis of PTSD? That's a mental disorder. Should they lose their rights to gun ownership because they were injured by war? All of a sudden, it's not so simple. Or how about domestic abusers? Nobody thinks they should have guns. We don't, obviously. But what if they haven't been convicted of anything yet? Can you strip rights from somebody who is legally innocent? And if you can take their gun rights away, how about their voting rights or their free speech rights? We're not sure of the answers to those, but we're positive they are real questions that need to be debated and considered by smart people sincerely trying to make the country better. The media screechers are not helping. They're telling us it's a simple fix as long as you care enough. That's a lie, and they're using children to tell that lie. Spare us. We're for the children. We're not for you. Congressman Jim Himes is a Democrat who represents Connecticut, and he joins us tonight. And Congressman, unlike a lot of people, you've been specific about what you want, and I admire that. You were on CNN on Monday, and you said, and I'm quoting now, "We want to be no different from Canada or Australia or Great Britain." So in Australia, and you hear this a lot from the left, 650,000 guns were confiscated from citizens, and that's what you're calling for. Who would do that? Who would take those guns in this country?
No, that's not what I'm calling for, Tucker. Australia is a pretty good example because after the massacre of 35 of its citizens in Port Arthur in 1996, they implemented a whole series. And I don't usually agree with you, Tucker, but you're right. This is a complicated problem that won't get solved, certainly not by the media on either side, but it will get solved over time, not perfectly, by lots of measures, some of which were tried by Australia. Now, Australia doesn't have a Second Amendment, so they're not the best example. But we do know that if we could get universal background check, no matter where you buy a gun, you get a background check. We do know that if you could find a way, and I admit that it is complicated with rights to make sure that people with temporary restraining orders temporarily give up their weapons. If you could do a whole bunch of those things, there is no question that, like Australia, we could see our gun violence in this country plummet.
Well, there is a question about that. I mean, we don't actually know. And we had the assault weapons ban of 1994, and it seemed like it would reduce killings, and it didn't. We know that conclusively. So you're never quite sure what the effect is, but you twice pointed to Australia as a model for gun policy here. So what specifically about Australia? Again, a country that confiscated its citizens' guns by the hundreds of thousands. What specifically did they do that we should do?
Yeah, you can keep using the word confiscation.
Well, they
all
did.
You want.
That's a fact.
That is not
No, that's
what
a
I
fact.
was calling for. It is also a fact that they instituted a mandatory waiting period for the purchase of a gun. It is also a fact that they instituted a universal background check. Two things that we don't have in this country that might be considered constitutional. So you can leave the confiscation behind because that's not what anybody is talking about.
But that was the essence. That was the essence of what they did. You're not allowed to own a gun in Australia except under circumstances where the government says you've somehow got a right to. Same with Great Britain. You pointed to Great Britain. In Great Britain, you're not allowed to own a gun. You have to prove that you should be allowed to have one. Are you calling for that?
Well, no, I'm not. In both of those countries, in the absence of a Second Amendment, you're right. You have to show a cause, a reason to have a gun. We have a Second Amendment in this country, which you may be surprised to hear I support. So we're obviously not going to require the citizens. Well, you can say that as much as you want, Tucker, but it's not true.
I'm just saying it once in response to what you said.
What I'm calling for is what, by the way, the president, I'm not usually in the habit of praising the president, what the president has said he's willing to consider. Things like tightening up the background check, things like restrictions on technology like bump stocks. Nobody's calling for confiscation or for everying they do in Australia and Great Britain.
But look, you're the one. Just to be clear, don't paint. Well, hold on. Don't paint me as a demagogue. You just said this 2 days ago on CNN, and you pointed specifically to a country that got rid of gun violence because they got rid of guns. So I think it's a fair question for me to ask when you point to Australia, why are you not calling for confiscation? Because that's the core thing they did.
First of all, Australia did not get rid of guns. There are still a lot of guns in Australia. There are plenty of guns in Canada. There are plenty of guns in the United Kingdom. These are countries that are different than our own. But no, they did not get rid of guns in any one of those countries. So
but they
you can keep talking about Australia. I never called for confiscation.
You're the one who was talking about Australia, not me. Okay, so let me just say this: those countries also have universal gun registration.
Australia is a good model in one way. Australia is a good model in one way, which was that after a tragedy, 35 people dead in Port Arthur, they got together, the Prime Minister and 6 states got together and said, let's pass a package of gun safety changes that will reduce violence. Now, not all of those changes would apply in the United States. I'm not calling for that.
Like taking them away by force from the population. So let me ask you this. Those countries also have
you can keep saying that, but that's not what anybody is calling for.
I'm sorry. I know a lot about this, and that was the whole point of the bill. So, and you must know that too.
That was a part of the bill that I'm not calling for, and frankly, almost nobody is calling for confiscation.
Okay, so let me ask you this: those countries all have universal gun registration? You own a gun, you have to register it with the government. Are you for that?
They actually canceled the universal gun registration in Australia because they felt that it was more of a burden on legal gun owners than it was on people who were going to use guns illegally. No, I'm not necessarily for it in the United States. I am for everybody having a background check. I am for people with temporary restraining orders temporarily giving up their guns. I am for a limit on the size of the magazine that you can use. Things that we've done here in the state of Connecticut, which have been constitutional and have not resulted in people's Second Amendment rights being violated in Connecticut.
I was wondering this today. So you work up on Capitol Hill surrounded by armed guards. Do you think they have too many guns, and do you believe that their magazines hold too many rounds? And if not, why not?
Tucker, nice try. You're not going to
No,
get
it's a
me to
sincere
say
question.
that
They protect
police officers.
you. You feel safe with a lot of people with high-capacity magazines, but I'm not allowed to have them in my house to protect my family. Because why? Explain it slowly so I can understand.
Okay, all right. Let's explain that. That's an absurd argument, but let me agree with you that I would be perfectly happy with the general public having the same firearms that the Capitol Police have if the general public were, like Capitol Police, required to undergo a criminal check, required to recertify themselves every single year for the use of those firearms, and personally accountable and professionally accountable for how they're used. So if you're willing to put all of those restrictions on the general public's right to own firearms, which is what the Capitol Police have, which is what
have no
Marines
right
have,
otherwise. Let me just ask you finally one last question. So,
nice
so
try,
you just,
my friend.
because some of us are confused by the details here, you endorsed the most recent iteration of the assault weapons ban. And in that, and I've asked this question of a lot of lawmakers, I'll be interested to see your response. In that, it would ban rifles that have something called a barrel shroud. Those would be illegal. Yeah. What is a barrel shroud, and why would you ban it?
So a barrel shroud, as you probably know, because you've talked to your other guests about it, is a covering on the barrel of a gun that allows you to hold that gun when the barrel has overheated because of multiple rounds being fired.
That's correct.
Now,
that's right.
Right. Okay. So we agree on that. Now, I'm not all that worked up over barrel shrouds, and I'm not even interested really in going the route of saying that an assault weapon ban will solve our problems. I happen to support a ban on technology that allows you to squeeze off 20 or 30 rounds in a minute or two. Now, I understand that
but
the
then
definition
why did
of an
you
assault
support
weapon
the
is
bill
tough.
that would have banned that and pistol grips and folding stocks and bayonet lugs and all these things that are irrelevant? It makes you seem not serious if you support something like that.
You know, lots of states have passed assault weapons ban. I heard you talking about, the desire of the populace earlier. Lots of states have implemented, including my own of Connecticut, assault weapon ban. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that the number of people who die in this country as a result of assault weapons, though they make the headlines, that is a relatively small percentage.
I'm aware of that.
Nonetheless, I don't want people to have guns that allow them, and most police officers don't want people to have guns that allow them to squeeze off 20 or 30 rounds very rapidly without reloading. Look, you asked about barrel shrouds. I'm not sure that barrel shrouds are the key here.
I think I'll let you unpack it all, and I appreciate your willingness to come on and explain your views on this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tucker.
Rachel Campbell-Duffy is a Fox News contributor, and she joins us tonight. Rachel, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So you talked to these politicians about what just happened last week in Parkland, and the story is, at least in part, about the failures of the government, of the FBI, of local police, but really the federal authorities.
The headlines, that is a relatively small percentage.
I'm aware of that.
Nonetheless, I don't want people to have guns that allow them, and most police officers don't want people to have guns that allow them to squeeze off 20 or 30 rounds very rapidly without reloading. Look, you asked about barrel shrouds. I'm not sure that barrel shrouds are the key here.
I think I'll let you unpack it all, and I appreciate your willingness to come on and explain your views on this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tucker.
Rachel Campbell-Duffy is a Fox News contributor, and she joins us tonight. Rachel, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So you talked to these politicians about what just happened last week in Parkland, and the story is, at least in part, about the failures of the government, of the FBI, of local police, but really the federal authorities to respond to a lot of warning signs, consistent warning signs. Should we be surprised that government officials just ignore that, and that the solution is always taking rights away from people who didn't do anything wrong and never holding to account the people who did, which is the FBI in this case? Why do they never mention that?
Well, it's a great point, but I'd also say this to you. I mean, I come at this from a very personal, two very personal points of view. One is I'm a military brat who was raised overseas, and the buses that I was on had armed security. The schools I went to were fortified, and I felt very safe. So when I hear that part of the conversation, that we should be fortifying our schools, that's something the federal government could do. State governments could do that as well, and I'm 100% for that. I'm also the wife of a congressman. As you know, this year we had a Bernie Sanders volunteer who shot up a bunch of Republican congressmen on a baseball field, and the only reason we didn't have a mass execution of those congressmen on that field is because Steve Scalise happened to be part of that baseball team. And by the way, he was going to leave 5 minutes after the shooter came. Had he left, there would not have been, he has a detail of Capitol policemen. He's the only one, he and leadership. So had he not been there, we would have had a massacre on that baseball field. So you brought up an excellent point in that, in your discussion with the congressman from Connecticut, which is that Nancy Pelosi and many politicians have security. Why aren't we securing our schools, and why aren't people allowed to take responsibility for their own security?
Because in the end, you know, if there's a real disaster, and I've seen it firsthand a couple of times, the cops leave. They've got families too. They're not going to protect you. I've seen it. You got to protect yourself or you're not going to be protected. So why are we allowing blowhards from the Congress to try and strip our ability to protect ourselves? I don't understand.
Well, we shouldn't. And as citizens, what we should do is expand the conversation. It's very dynamic. It's very complicated. It's about fortifying our schools. But listen, when Adam Lanza's mom, before he killed her, after he shot up the children in Newtown, she wanted to have him committed. And after that massacre in Newtown, many parents came forward and said, I'm scared of my mentally ill child who has had violent tendencies, and they can't get those children committed. So there's a problem there.
For sure.
And frankly, there's another problem, Tucker, that people don't want to talk about, and that is that we have a family crisis in this country. There are broken homes, broken families. There's a moral crisis, and we have families in schools that really, frankly, a culture that's unwilling to talk about right from wrong.
No, you're right.
That's also a part of the problem that Hollywood and the left is unwilling to talk about.
Yeah,
it's
it turns out the
complicated.
nuclear family worked pretty well. We should have thought about that before we destroyed it. Rachel, thank you very much.
Good point.
Great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Rogue judges are determined to impose their will on this country, regardless of what the law says, regardless of what voters think. What's the solution to that? Is there one? That's next. You've heard a lot about our failing institutions on this program. We now know the FBI is riddled with incompetent partisan hacks. The intelligence community seems to exist mostly to spy on you and leak information about politicians it dislikes. Your state and local governments are full of bureaucrats who are paid more to deliver less every year and then retire with a fat pension in their 50s. Academia, meanwhile, is apparently dominated by lazy mediocrities more interested in political activism than in teaching. There is a lot of rot in our halls of power, but our federal courts may be the most decayed institution of all, though they receive very little attention. Under the last two administrations, the courts increasingly have come to see themselves not as interpreters of the law, their constitutional role, but as the country's main policymakers. Consider, for example, what's been happening with DACA. Now, as a factual matter, it is indisputable that any president has the authority to end DACA. The program was a creation from whole cloth of the Obama administration. It has no legal basis. Actual federal law says that illegal immigrants are to be deported from this country, not given legal residency or work permits. The Obama administration simply chose to ignore that law, citing the right of prosecutorial discretion. Now, that argument could be valid theoretically, though we are skeptical, but here's what we know. If Obama can choose to ignore the law, it is obvious the Trump administration has the right to enforce the law passed by Congress. And yet left-wing judges disagree. Several have ruled already it is somehow illegal to end DACA. Their justification for this is legally ludicrous. Last month, San Francisco District Court Judge William Alsup blocked the end of DACA nationwide. He said getting rid of it was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. As part of his ruling, Alsup simply asserted that DACA should continue because it was, quote, in the public interest. In other words, the judge likes the program, therefore ending it is illegal. Last week, another judge, Judge Nicholas Garifas in New York, ruled that DACA can't be eliminated because the administration has not provided a valid reason for eliminating it, as if following the law were not enough. And it's not the first bizarre ruling from that judge. In 2010, Garifas ordered the New York Fire Department to use racial quotas for hiring rather than merit in order to achieve some goals he had in mind, and the results were immediate. Injuries in the fire department went up. The dropout rate of firemen in that class surged from 10% to 24%. In a later reversal, an appeals court said that Garifas's bias was so obvious and so severe that parts of the case had to be assigned to a new judge. And yet, of course, Garifas is still on the bench. He and a lot of judges like him. In Michigan, a judge has blocked the deportation of convicted Iraqi criminals from this country, citing the alleged danger they would face if they returned to their own country. In New York, a judge released an illegal immigrant criminal prior to deportation, claiming he had a constitutional right to, quote, say goodbye. In Florida, a judge blocked the deportation of nearly 100 Somalis because of the conditions on the airplane that would fly them home. For real, that happened. This sort of thing is actually commonplace now. In the name of progressive resistance to the president, anything can be declared unconstitutional, and is. For example, it's been settled law pretty much forever that a president has the power to exclude foreigners from the country based on security concerns. But in the past year, multiple judges have ignored this and struck down the administration's travel bans. Some have taken the legally meaningless position that the bans were unconstitutional because of things Trump said on the campaign trail. Judge James Wynn of the Fourth Circuit compared the president's travel ban to FDR's internment of the Japanese, American citizens of Japanese descent, during the Second World War. That's not legal analysis, it's political punditry. Get that man a CNN contract. For more than 200 years, the U.S. military determined who could serve in uniform based in part on which medical conditions might negatively affect a person's ability to fight wars. And there are a lot of them. That makes sense, of course. It's no longer the law, thanks to judges. In his final months in office, President Obama declared that the military must admit transgendered soldiers, regardless of the effect on military readiness. That was a political decision, obviously, but thanks to activist judges, it is now a constitutional right somehow. Judges Marvin Garbus of Maryland and Colleen Collar-Cotterly of the District of Columbia have ruled that it's unconstitutional to bar transgendered volunteers from service. Garbus's ruling went on to order the government to cover gender reassignment surgery at taxpayer expense. These judges are not interpreting the law, much less enforcing it. They are inventing the law. They reject the core idea of democracy, which is a country whose policies are determined by its citizens, its voters. The judges are in control, no matter what you want or who you voted for. Increasingly, the elected branches of government are irrelevant. And this is especially true on the issue of immigration, as we said. In the 1980s, a limited amnesty for farm workers was supposed to end in 1988. The courts ruled it had to be extended further. And as a result, thousands of additional people were given amnesty they weren't supposed to receive. Lawmakers were ignored. In the 1990s, California voters overwhelmingly passed Proposition 187 that denied state social services to people here illegally. Courts gutted that law without even allowing it to take effect. And now California's entire middle class is fleeing the state because illegal immigration has made it a dystopia suitable only for the very poor and the very rich. That's exactly what voters didn't want, but the vote didn't care. So how long before some judge on the Ninth Circuit, for example, decides illegal aliens have the right to vote in our elections because, well, just because? You can laugh if you want, but on some level you know that's coming, because it is. In a functioning constitutional republic, judges are essential. Their job is to restrain politicians from trampling our core governing principles. And by core governing principles, we mean the ones written in the Constitution, not on the New York Times editorial page or at the base of the Statue of Liberty. Our system has worked well for hundreds of years, but it's breaking apart, and it's breaking apart because of judicial integrity. There isn't enough of that. If you find yourself arguing that the Constitution does not contain the right to keep and bear arms, but does contain a right to abortion, you're lying. That's not a difference of interpretation, it's dishonesty. One is in the text, one is not. Right now, this is happening almost exclusively on the left, but it's not hard to imagine conservatives doing it too. Why wouldn't they after a while? What happens when Republican-appointed judges start striking down laws a Democratic Congress passed on taxes or health care, the environment, abortion, you name it, simply because they don't like them? The judiciary will lose whatever honor it once had. It will become a political weapon. That has happened in a lot of countries, and it's a disaster every time. Judges who misuse their power ought to be called to account. They're not gods. They're government officials who work for us. And when they're corrupt or dishonest, they ought to face the same criticism as politicians or bureaucrats. Abraham Lincoln understood this. He accused the High Court's Chief Justice of plotting to spread slavery throughout America. Lincoln is praised by historians for doing that because he was right. But when this administration points out judicial malfeasance, and there's a lot of it, the ruling class responds with howls. That's an attack on democracy, they say.
I find these attacks on the judiciary absolutely abhorrent and unacceptable.
I'll be honest, I don't understand language like that. We don't have so-called judges. We don't have so-called senators. We don't have so-called presidents.
So-called judge. Is it appropriate for the president to be questioning the legitimacy of a federal judge in that way? Doesn't that undermine the separation of powers in the Constitution written right next door?
They're lying to you, as they always are. It's not anti-democratic to demand that the public's views should fundamentally shape public policy. That's the essence of democracy itself. Jonathan Turley is a particularly distinguished professor at George Washington University Law School, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
So that's kind of the essence of the whole debate, is to what extent should public policy be guided by the public's views in a democracy? And obviously there are mediating structures, the Congress, the judiciary, the executive, but basically if you get too far from what the public wants, it's not democracy, is it?
Well, we of course live in a representative democracy.
Right.
You elect people to make decisions for you, but you hopefully won't have too much of a disconnect at the end of the day between the policies being pursued. Ultimately, those laws have to be written by people who are political representatives.
Exactly.
And that means that the courts must retain a fairly narrow role in this system. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. You know, Madison created a system by which factional interests would sort of roll around between the legislative and executive branch, particularly in Congress. And out of that would come what's called a majoritarian compromise, that we work out our differences. That system only works if there's no alternative to that system. If you start to make decisions, for example, in the courts that are really political decisions, it takes the Madisonian system offline. And that's what has given us a stability. You know, you have countries like France that went through constitutions with almost a seasonal regularity, and they were very unstable. Ours has been stable. You can say a lot of things about problems that we have, but we're still here. We've gone through incredible pressures and periods, and we're still here. And it's largely due to the fact that we all have sort of skin in the game. We all know that if we respect the political system, that it's worth working for change.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I agree with that completely. And I have always believed in our system, and I want to believe in it. But if you have judges who clearly aren't even making a good faith effort to pretend that their decisions correspond to the text of the Constitution, then don't the rest of us have a right to say something about that?
Well, I think that there's no problem with criticizing the courts, and every president in modern times has taken the courts to task, and they've all pledged to change the courts on the left or the right. That's a natural part of the process. There are times when you cross the line.
I agree.
You know, the president's criticism of the ethnicity of that one judge crossed the line.
I hated
those
that.
Were
I agree with you. I hated that.
But
that doesn't mean that if a judge doesn't see the right to bear arms, which is written explicitly in the Bill of Rights, but somehow imagines, you know, the right to abortion, which of course is nowhere to be found, doesn't that raise, I mean, we take that for granted, but it's very common. Doesn't that raise the question, like, what? Where does that come from?
Look, I think that people of good faith can disagree on these issues.
Yes?
I think issues of the Second Amendment, abortion, these are all penumbral issues, although the Second Amendment is expressed, but in terms of abortion, the court refers to it as a sort of a penumbral right. And we can disagree about those things, and we can do so civilly. But there's no problem with citizens or a president saying, that's just not what the law says. That's not what we created as a free people.
Right, and we're in charge. George Stephanopoulos does not like it if you say that, though, so just keep that in mind if you dare. Professor, thank you.
Thank you.
We have terrifying new numbers about the growth of MS-13, which is actually real, despite what they tell you. It's, in fact, America's deadliest gang. We've got the numbers next. How many American cities all of a sudden seem to resemble slums. Some of you may have trouble visualizing what that means, and this is for you. After last night's program, we were sent this picture by a viewer who lives and works in the city of San Francisco. It shows the sidewalk outside his office littered with, by our count, more than 30 syringes and other drug paraphernalia. This is not in some abandoned lot or underneath the freeway overpass. It's right outside the offices of Spotify, a top tech company in downtown San Francisco. It's right across the street from WeWork. It's 1 block away from Zenres. These are all tech companies, and 3 blocks from tech giants Twitter and Uber. These are some of the richest companies in the richest industry in the richest city in the United States, and their employees work in a circus of trash and drugs. And the question is, do elites even care? And the answer, of course, is no, they don't. U.S. cities aren't just plagued by homeless drug addicts, but also by deadly Central American gangs. It's not propaganda, it is real. We've got new numbers out today about the extent of MS-13. That's the primarily Salvadoran gang that has become the deadliest organized crime ring in the country. Jessica Vaughn is Director of Policy at the Center for Immigration Studies, and she joins us with those numbers. Jessica, thanks for coming on.
Glad to be with you.
So MS-13, despite it sounds like efforts from the federal government, is metastasizing. Is that what the numbers show?
Well, it is. Some people have been very dismissive of all the attention to this gang, but it has rebuilt itself. It's not a homegrown gang. It was formed by people who came from Central America decades ago illegally. So that was a failure in border security. But ICE and other law enforcement agencies were able to stifle it for a while there. But in recent years, it's really rebounded because of this. It took advantage of this surge of unaccompanied minors that's been going on for several years, and also the lack of immigration enforcement. So they have come back with a vengeance, and this is not just petty gang violence, nuisance crimes. We're talking murders, hundreds of murders that MS-13 members have been arrested for. And it's a scourge in a number of communities that
So give us a sense of the scale. So we think of MS-13 as primarily in Los Angeles County, in suburban Virginia, outside Washington, maybe Chicago. It's spread, though. Tell us what that looks like.
At a certain point in time, the gang decided to almost open up franchises around the country. Places like Long Island, Boston, Charlotte, North Carolina, as you said, the suburbs of Washington, D.C., because this is a gang that's controlled from El Salvador, and the cliques in the United States do send money back to El Salvador to help to support the whole gang. And so at a certain point in time, the leaders put pressure on those members here in the United States to kick it up a notch and start doing more and bring in some more people from Central America, recruit more from these kids who've recently arrived. They do extortion, home invasions, sex trafficking, prostitution, and murder to prove themselves to each other and to intimidate others in the community. And we found that they were active in 22 states just in the last few years, and concentrated, as I said, in those areas that experienced a lot of the illegal arrivals from Central America. And it's urban, it's rural as well, in some places that have never had this kind of a gang presence before, and it's difficult for them.
And we should point out that the victims
are almost
the victims are almost all immigrants, something that immigrants' rights advocates, so-called, ignore. Ironically, Jessica, thank you for coming on and telling us that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, the companies Google and Twitter, two of the biggest companies in the world, are once again working to silence free speech online. That story next. We've talked a lot on this show. We're going to talk a lot more about the growth of the power of big tech companies and how they are now a far bigger threat to your civil liberties than the federal government ever was. Now, the head of a social media network says that Google is censoring his company. How? Bill Ottman is the co-creator of Mind.com, and he joins us in the studio tonight. Bill, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So Google is trying to censor your company. How?
So we got banned from their advertising platform, probably caught up in their out-of-control algorithms, which basically blanket ban companies based on certain keywords with no real rationality.
So just for perspective, I'm not overstating it when I say if you're banned from Google's ad platform, I mean, that can be death for a company.
It can. It's actually killed tons of companies and content creators on YouTube who are demonetized. It's a pretty serious situation.
So they have the power to just snuff out a young company. Why did they do this to you, do you think? Did you do something wrong?
Probably some keyword that got caught up in their algorithms, but it's actually a symptom of a bigger problem of censorship, algorithm manipulation happening on all of the major social networks. And so we're actually building our own ad network to battle this, and it's going to be completely transparent on the blockchain so that everyone can see what's happening with our system, where it's completely open source, anyone can inspect it, peer review it. So this is how things have to be. It can't be proprietary.
They can't. And one thing that I think the news-consuming public doesn't understand is that almost all news you read online is controlled by Google and Facebook, because they control, 90% of the ads. So they're in charge. They own all the news sources, in effect.
And when you go to people's websites who host Google Ads, Google's actually spying on you through those websites. So by putting Google Ads on your website, you're actually becoming an agent of Google. So that's why we need transparent, more freedom-based ad platforms to emerge which don't spy on people by default.
So you're challenging one of the most complete monopolies in American life. Why would they let you do that? Why would
it's not about them letting us do that. It's, I mean, decentralization, open source, blockchain, transparent social networks are emerging, and there's really nothing they can do about it. Hopefully they will transform. That's what you can hope.
Huh. So you think that they have this power, the federal government has done nothing about it, they have a monopoly over basically over all digital information, and the federal government refuses to rein it in for whatever reason. You think you can provide an alternative to that? You can free up the system from their control?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening. Free, open source, decentralized networks are rising up.
What's it going to be called?
I mean, it's going to be a network of networks. The next big network probably is not going to be a centralized site. It's going to be a multitude of networks interoperating so that it actually can't get censored.
So you think that this will radically disempower Google and Facebook?
I think that this movement will, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. Hire bodyguards. Bill, that's just kidding. But Godspeed, and we'll definitely be rooting for you. That would be transformative, I think, in ways that people don't even fully understand, but we're definitely on your side. Thanks.
Thanks, Tucker.
CNN's anti-Trump hysteria is dropping the network to remarkable new lows. We'll show you the latest. We can't wait to show you the latest, in fact, next. CNN has been so completely over the top in its coverage of this administration that those of us who remember it from 20 years ago, or in my case who used to work there, just stare slack-jawed at the screen thinking, really, can this be happening? Last night it went even farther than normal. The network editorialized in its news chyrons, the script at the bottom of the screen, twice. First, in the Situation Room, one chyron read, White House repeats Trump's false claim that he's tougher on Russia than Obama. As if that's an objective claim. Meanwhile, up front with Aaron Burnett, a breaking news chyron blared this, White House, it's clear Russian meddling had no impact, followed by, in parenthesis, no, it's not. Fact-checking their own chyrons is totally insane. Joe Concha writes about the media for The Hill. He watches a ton of CNN. That's why he's got a facial twitch, and he joins us tonight. Joe, I mean, chyrons, and we should just to be fair to Wolf Blitzer, who I think does try pretty hard to keep it pretty straight, but they don't write the chyrons. But, like, nobody saw that and said, oh, that's too far. We can't do that.
Oh, no, obviously that was a decision in the control room, Tucker, and same with Aaron Burnett, right? I've been on Aaron's show 100 times. I like her personally. I respect her professionally. I think she tries to do a good job. They don't have any decision as far as those chyrons. Afterwards, they could read the criticism and say, hey, guys, it's my face that's on the screen. I'm the only one who's going to get criticism for this, so maybe we should put an end to it. But as you said, the chyrons like we're seeing below on our screen right now, on an editorial show, on an opinion show like yours, that's fine because it's like your newspaper, right? You go to your editorial page, and that's fine. But on news programs, that's something that plays into the narrative if you're CNN, that you are the opposition party, that you're leading the resistance against the Trump campaign and not serve as an objective news organization as it purports to be. Now, what's a factual chyron? For instance, like today in New York. New York experienced record high temperatures in Central Park. That's a fact. Billy Graham dies at age 99. That's a fact. When you have breaking news, White House repeats Trump's false claim that he's tougher on Russia. As you said, that's subjective and that's an opinion. And John Noonan, he summed this up best. He is and I'll quote it, the senior counselor for military and defense affairs for Senator Tom Cotton. And he said, and by the way, John Noonan is no relation to Danny Noonan. I just want to make that clear. Quote, CNN respectfully, please tell your producer not to do this. You can't anoint yourself arbiter in these debates. Adding, you can get experts to debate the merits of each administration's policies. That's perfectly fine. But this isn't just putting your finger on the scale, it's sitting on it. And I think that sums it up nicely, Tucker.
That's right. And I just want to be totally clear. The term chyron refers to the banner at the bottom of the screen. It's a TV term, so I don't want to confuse anybody. Yeah, it's a headline. That's exactly right, that the host is not aware of. So have you noticed this all day? These cable news anchors, most of whom, as far as I know, are childless, lecturing the rest of us about how we don't love the children if we don't agree with them on a very specific political issue, guns. Have you ever seen the press preachier than it was today?
I remember on the gay marriage rulings a couple of years ago, a side was taken. It was a side that many Americans agreed with, but you can't do that, right? And the problem is now it's not a matter of, okay, I think the age to buy guns should be raised to 21, and no, I think it shouldn't, and here's why. It's always, you know what, you're a bad person. You want children to die as a result, and we saw it on the conservative side as well, on the liberal side as far as people saying that these children are actors, actually being coached. Please, I mean, I had a friend that had a daughter in that school hiding in a closet, and the emotion is real, and I would never doubt these kids in terms of their sentiment around this. They're not being coached, Tucker.
Yeah, and because we're not liberals, we support the right of everybody, even those we disagree with, to say exactly what they think. We believe in free speech, and we mean it. Joe, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Giddy up. Good to see you.
CNN has been so completely over the top in its coverage of this administration that those of us who remember it from 20 years ago, or in my case who used to work there, just stare slack-jawed at the screen thinking, really, can this be happening? Last night it went even farther than normal. The network editorialized in its news chyrons, the script at the bottom of the screen, twice. First, in the Situation Room, one chyron read, "White House repeats Trump's false claim that he's tougher on Russia than Obama." As if that's an objective claim. Meanwhile, up front with Aaron Burnett, a breaking news chyron blared this, "White House, it's clear Russian meddling had no impact," followed by, in parenthesis, "No, it's not." Fact-checking their own chyrons is totally insane. Joe Concha writes about the media for The Hill. He watches a ton of CNN. That's why he's got a facial twitch, and he joins us tonight. Joe, I mean, chyrons, and we should just to be fair to Wolf Blitzer, who I think does try pretty hard to keep it pretty straight, but they don't write the chyrons. But, like, nobody saw that and said, "Oh, that's too far. We can't do that."
Oh, no, obviously that was a decision in the control room, Tucker, and same with Aaron Burnett, right? I've been on Aaron's show 100 times. I like her personally. I respect her professionally. I think she tries to do a good job. They don't have any decision as far as those chyrons. Afterwards, they could read the criticism and say, hey, guys, it's my face that's on the screen. I'm the only one who's going to get criticism for this, so maybe we should put an end to it. But as you said, the chyrons like we're seeing below on our screen right now, on an editorial show, on an opinion show like yours, that's fine because it's like your newspaper, right? You go to your editorial page, and that's fine. But on news programs, that's something that plays into the narrative if you're CNN, that you are the opposition party, that you're leading the resistance against the Trump campaign and not serve as an objective news organization as it purports to be. Now, what's a factual chyron? For instance, like today in New York. New York experienced record high temperatures in Central Park. That's a fact. Billy Graham dies at age 99. That's a fact. When you have breaking news, White House repeats Trump's false claim that he's tougher on Russia. As you said, that's subjective and that's an opinion. And John Noonan, he summed this up best. He is and I'll quote it, the senior counselor for military and defense affairs for Senator Tom Cotton. And he said, and by the way, John Noonan is no relation to Danny Noonan. I just want to make that clear. Quote, CNN respectfully, please tell your producer not to do this. You can't anoint yourself arbiter in these debates. Adding, you can get experts to debate the merits of each administration's policies. That's perfectly fine. But this isn't just putting your finger on the scale, it's sitting on it. And I think that sums it up nicely, Tucker.
That's right. And I just want to be totally clear. The term chyron refers to the banner at the bottom of the screen. It's a TV term, so I don't want to confuse
it's like
anybody.
A headline.
Yeah, it's a headline. That's exactly right, that the host is not aware of. So have you noticed this all day? These cable news anchors, most of whom, as far as I know, are childless, lecturing the rest of us about how we don't love the children if we don't agree with them on a very specific political issue, guns. Have you ever seen the press preachier than it was today?
I remember on the gay marriage rulings a couple of years ago, a side was taken. It was a side that many Americans agreed with, but you can't do that, right? And the problem is now it's not a matter of, okay, I think the age to buy guns should be raised to 21, and no, I think it shouldn't, and here's why. It's always, you know what, you're a bad person. You want children to die as a result, and we saw it on the conservative side as well, on the liberal side as far as people saying that these children are actors, actually being coached. Please, I mean, I had a friend that had a daughter in that school hiding in a closet, and the emotion is real, and I would never doubt these kids in terms of their sentiment around this. They're not being coached, Tucker.
Yeah, and because we're not liberals, we support the right of everybody, even those we disagree with, to say exactly what they think. We believe in free speech, and we mean it. Joe, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Giddy up. Good to see you.